In the Bayantek Empire, noble blood was everything, and few lines ran deeper than that of House Rosano. For generations, the duchy had been woven into the very fabric of the empire's history, its name synonymous with power, prestige, and unyielding tradition. From this lineage came Eleliana Rosano, daughter of a duke whose influence stretched far and wide, a girl whose beauty and grace had made her the most coveted jewel of high society. But jewels do not choose who wears them. Duke Dimitri Rosano had always regarded his daughter as one of his finest assets, a piece in a game far larger than she could comprehend. And so, when the matter of her marriage arose, it was never truly a conversation. It was a verdict. When Eleliana learned of it, she wept. She had come to her father trembling, eyes red-rimmed and swollen, hoping that perhaps, just this once, he might look at her with something other than cold calculation. Instead, he regarded her tears the way one regards a child's tantrum, with mild contempt and barely concealed impatience. "Stop this indecent display," he said flatly, his voice carrying neither warmth nor hesitation. Her legs gave way beneath her. She sank to the floor, hands clasped, ready to beg if she had to. The nanny, it turned out, had told him everything. She had gone to him with her worries, her concerns about the prince, about the kind of man Eleliana was being sent to. The stories about Emperor Zakador were well known even in Bayantek. 5 wives, an empress, and a palace full of concubines. Nonsense, her father said sharply before she could even finish the thought. That is the emperor you speak of. Your fiancé is a 7th prince. So far from the throne, he might as well be a stranger to the palace. He can barely afford a title, let alone several wives. He added, almost as an afterthought, that the imperial family of Zakador had a habit of dying young. The princes who failed to reach the throne rarely survived those who did. It was politics. It was brutal, but it was not, in his estimation, her concern. Still, the ladies of Bayantek spoke of it in hushed, pitying tones over their tea. How those who married into Zakador's imperial family took on a dangerous gamble. When Eleliana's name came up in their conversations, their sympathy was genuine. It was little comfort. She repeated it to herself like a prayer. Please, not Zakador. Please, not Zakador. Her father's patience finally snapped. He rolled his eyes, voice rising. The union had been negotiated as a symbol of peace between empires. There was a contract. It explicitly prohibited polygamy on the prince's part. No one would harm a princess whose marriage represented diplomatic accord. Eleliana's sobs shook her small frame until she could barely breathe. She opened her mouth to protest once more, and her father silenced her with a raised voice that rattled the walls. You exist in clover, he reminded her icily, because you are Eleliana Rosano, daughter of this duchy. It is time you repaid what that name has cost me. The Duke of Rosano laughed then, a short, hollow sound, and the matter was closed. She had no choice. She never had. A month later, Eleliana arrived in the Zakador capital in a procession that gleamed with ceremony. The carriages were adorned, the servants impeccably dressed, and the pageantry was magnificent. A beautiful lie wrapped around a girl who could not stop her hands from shaking beneath her gloves. A young man rode alongside the carriage. She overheard the servants murmuring that he was one of the junior princes, sent to escort the future bride. She paid him little mind. Her heart hammered as the procession slowed and the gates of the palace opened before her. Don't cry, she told herself. Don't you dare cry. Her lower lip trembled. The gathered crowd watched her with bright, admiring eyes. She must have looked the part, composed, graceful, every inch the noble daughter she had been trained to be. But inside, she was nothing but fear and the raw, aching sting of betrayal. Each step forward brought her closer to the man whose face she had never seen. The man who would become her husband. The man her father had sold her to. She almost didn't notice him at first. A light wind moved through the courtyard, lifting strands of golden hair. The young man standing at the far end turned slowly, and the world seemed to tilt. Eleliana's breath caught in her throat. Every instinct screamed at her to turn and run, to flee anywhere that wasn't here. And then he smiled. It was a smile that undid her entirely. Marcel Zacador, 7th prince of the Zacador Empire, walked toward her with unhurried grace, his eyes warm and impossibly deep, his golden hair catching the afternoon light like something from a painting. He reached out and gently took her hand in both of his. For a single, bewildering moment, Aureliana forgot that her cheeks were wet. He told her, softly, that he had fallen in love with her the moment he saw her. Despite everything, despite the unwanted marriage, the foreign land, the fear that had shadowed her every waking hour, Aureliana fell in love with her husband. It was not a slow thing, nor a reluctant one. Marcel was attentive and passionate, and his affection for her seemed genuine and boundless. Their honeymoon in Ryanin was everything she had never dared to hope for, tender and warm, full of laughter and the kind of ease she had never known in her father's house. She was naive then. She knew it later, but for that brief, luminous stretch of time, she was simply happy. The world, however, did not stay still. The Empress of Zacador, having lost her own child, adopted Marcel, the 7th prince born of the emperor's late 5th wife. It was an unexpected turn, and with it came something no one had quite anticipated: momentum. The court began to murmur. Support began to shift. People who had once dismissed Marcel as an irrelevance began to pay attention. He had survived missions his brothers had designed to kill him. He had returned victorious where others had perished. He had earned the blessing of the bishop himself and aided in saving the empire's people from a devastating plague. One by one, the nobles began to raise their voices in his favor. Marcel brushed it all aside. He was lucky, he said, nothing more. But the look in his eyes when he said it told a different story. Aureliana noticed the change before she could name it. The way he looked at her began to shift, still warm, but with something new beneath it, something hungry. When he spoke to her now, there were new words woven into his old endearments: the throne, the empire, emperor. He was no longer simply her husband. He was a man with ambitions large enough to swallow the world. She pushed down the unease rising in her chest. She loved him, and she chose to love what he wanted, too, even when it frightened her. The Duchy of Rosano, for its part, saw opportunity. Enormous sums began flowing from her family's coffers into Marcel's campaign. Aureliana sacrificed quietly and steadily at his side, giving whatever was asked of her, telling herself it was love. Marcel became crown prince, then emperor, and Aureliana became empress. But the crown carried shadows. The empire's council fractured almost immediately. Years of war and tension between Baintek and Zacador had poisoned the air, and Aureliana's origins became a weapon wielded against her. Half the council called for Archduke Vaint's daughter to take her place. The other half, smaller, quieter, defended the crown princess's right to her throne. The blood of Baintek cannot be mixed with the imperial line of Zacador. The words spread like fire. And then Marcel took her hand, not gently, the way he once had, and asked her if she wanted to become empress. She stared at him. "I am your wife," she said, voice brittle. "This is my rightful place." His gaze was inquisitive, clinical. "Why?" The word struck her like a blow. Her heart cracked down the middle. "Because I love you," she said. "Because I am your wife, not your concubine. If you want to make me the second wife, then send me home. Send me back to Baintek." Something in him relented. He pulled her against his chest, stroking her hair, murmuring that he loved only her, that no one else mattered. She let herself believe him. In the end, Aureliana was crowned Empress of Zacador. The happiness, such as it was, did not survive long. Marcel announced that he required a second wife, someone who would strengthen his rule. He would take Archduke Vaint's daughter, Elizabeth. Now that he was emperor, he said, the old restrictions no longer applied. She had to understand this. Elizabeth arrived promptly, gracious and carefully grateful. Aureliana received her with a thin smile and the practiced poise of a woman who had been performing composure her entire life. "What a pleasure to meet you," she said. "Be an example to all who serve this palace." Marcel, seemingly satisfied that Aureliana's feelings had been managed, grew bolder. Women arrived at the palace in succession. The concubines multiplied. The rivalry between them simmered, then boiled. And Aleliana, the empress of Zakador, the jewel of the Rosano Duchy, realized that in order to survive, she would have to do the one thing she had never wanted to do. She would have to kill the love she had kept alive in her chest like a small, stubborn flame. Her husband, remarkably, was helping her do it. He appeared in her chambers without invitation, seated himself comfortably, and launched into detailed complaints about his other women. The third wife had missed a prayer meeting with the bishop due to illness. Had Aleliana really arranged such a harsh punishment? Copying sacred texts? She raised her brows. Copying sacred texts is not a punishment. Marcel's voice rose. The bishop himself had been present. The girl had been poisoned not long ago. He was deeply disappointed in the empress's cruelty. Aleliana stood very still and said nothing. The other noble women tried to help in their way. At tea gatherings, duchesses dispensed advice with cheerful efficiency. Men always swear eternal love, they said. But it fades. That's simply how it is. The solution, they agreed, was in air. If she wanted to reclaim her husband's attention, she needed only to go to him, even if it was a single, unguarded moment, even if his affection was fleeting. A son changes everything. Aleliana was horrified. She was an empress, not a woman who crept into men's bedrooms uninvited. But the nobility had worn her down, and her pride had already endured so many fractures that she could no longer find the exact shape of it. She went to him. Marcel was pleased. He began visiting her again, but there was something different in his manner now. He was rough when displeased. He enjoyed the flinch she tried to hide when he raised his voice. He enjoyed, she realized slowly and with dawning dread, her fear. One evening, in her chambers, as he pressed himself against her with that particular brand of contemptuous intimacy that had replaced affection, she finally reached the limit. She pushed him away. "I don't want this," she said. The blow came fast. The ringing in her ears lasted longer. She found herself sprawled against the table, vision fracturing into spots of light and color, staring up at her husband's distorted face. He loomed over her and spoke with measured calm. He knew she didn't love him anymore. He was simply helping her get what she wanted. She needed to love him, or at least perform it convincingly, because he had stayed when everyone expected him to cast her aside. He kissed her then, cold, deliberate, possessive. Something inside Aleliana went silent. Not grief, not rage. Something quieter and more final than either. Her love for him died in that room. It did not flicker out. It simply ceased to exist. She understood clearly in the stillness that followed what she had to do to survive. He arrived without warning, as dangerous men tend to do. Flint Howard, Northern Archduke of the Bantek Empire, stood in her chambers with the unhurried confidence of a man who had walked into hostile territory many times and had always walked back out. Behind him, one of her maids was held with a blade pressed to her throat. Aleliana looked at him with every ounce of the imperial contempt she had spent years cultivating. He was a man of impeccable reputation in Bantek, close companion to Crown Prince Karis, a celebrated warrior, a name spoken with admiration in halls she had long since left behind. But behind that gleaming reputation lay a history shaped by loss. His grandfather, Crown Prince Alonso, had died before reaching the throne, sending the succession down a different branch. His father, Maximilian Howard, had been sent to Zakador as a hostage following Emperor Leopold's defeat in war. Flint had been born in Zakador, lost his mother young, and been abandoned in Reskin to spend his adolescence in a country that mocked his bloodline. In Zakador, children had called him the heir to failure. Now this man bowed before her and told her he had come to bring her home. She could return to Bantek, he said. Live peacefully, be free. He would guarantee her safety personally, not in the name of Damien Rosano, but in his own. The name detonated something inside her. The cup left her hand before she'd consciously decided to throw it. He dodged with a soldier's reflexes. The tea splashed across the left side of his face. She was on her feet, shaking. "How dare you invoke that name in my presence?" she said, voice cutting. "You came here to use me. Whatever he promised you, a quick path to the throne, access to Zakador's weaknesses. I am not a door you walk through. I would sooner trust the Emperor. Flint suppressed whatever reaction flickered across his face. He softened his voice and acknowledged her anger, but held his ground. Marcel Zakador, he said quietly, was not a man to be trusted. Watch your words, she said. He is my husband. He is Emperor. Flint's expression remained carefully neutral. He instructed his companion to release her maid. Then he told her she had 3 days to change her mind. If she came to the greenhouse at the same hour, he would be waiting. He promised her a quiet life. She told him she wished him luck and dismissed him. He paused at the door and met her eyes. A quiet life, he repeated, as though the words themselves were enough. Then he was gone. Her maid collapsed at her feet, weeping, begging her to think about herself for once. She would follow her anywhere, to Bayantek, to the ends of the earth, to the end of her days. Aleliana stood in the silence he had left behind and thought about her brother. Damien Rosano, her twin, had come to her years ago with a plan wrapped in the language of love. Support your husband, he had said. Help him reach the throne. The duchy will back you both. This is how you and Marcel survive. And she had believed him. She had stolen documents from the Emperor's private office. She had copied military intelligence by candlelight and passed it to men she never saw twice. She had done this for her family, and she had done it out of fear, and she had convinced herself it was loyalty. When Marcel's coldness became cruelty and the concubines multiplied, and she had written to Damien in tears, terrified of poison, worn down by court politics, begging for help, asking about divorce, her twin had replied with ice. Divorce? Have you gone mad? What would be the point? The duchy invested everything in you. Stop being weak. Stop embarrassing us. That was the last thing that resembled love she ever received from her family. She could not go back to them, but she could not trust a man who had arrived in her chambers with a knife at her maid's throat, either. And yet, the gray of Flint Howard's eyes would not leave her alone. 3 days passed. Flint stood in the garden, patient and still, while his companion paced with increasing anxiety. The patrol would arrive soon. She wasn't coming. Then a figure emerged from the shadows, layered in dark fabric, a hood drawn low, and both men went still. It was not the Empress. It was her senior maid, Vivin. She delivered Aleliana's answer in precise, unhurried words. The Empress would not come. However, the palace patrol schedule had changed since yesterday, and a servant's passage ran clear to the border. He should take it, travel through Reskin, use different papers in each region. Flint's companion was immediately suspicious. A trap, he muttered. It had to be. Vivin ignored him. She had one final message from the Empress herself. The little son of Bayantek has lost his light. Aleliana thanks him for his honesty. She wishes him safe return and a throne, so that the fear of dishonor may never eclipse his fortune. Vivin pulled her hood up and walked away without looking back. Flint stood in the dark garden and held the words for a long moment. There had been a morning. She allowed herself to remember it sometimes in the way you press a bruise to remind yourself you can still feel, when a doctor had taken her pulse and smiled at her with genuine warmth. She was pregnant. The tears that came then were the right kind of tears. She had pressed her hands to her face and sobbed with relief and disbelief and joy so complete she could barely contain it. With a child, she was safe. With a child, the factions calling for her removal would fall silent. With a child, she would survive. The child was not destined to be born. The miscarriage left her hollow in a way that nothing before it had managed. She locked herself in the palace and wept for days. And when the grief finally settled into something she could carry, she emerged to find that the world had grown crueler in her absence. Marcel came to see her. His words were precise and cutting. He had always been glad to spend nights with her, he said, but to what purpose if she couldn't give him a child? A daughter would be enough. Anything, just something. The court grew louder. She was bringing shame to Zakadora. She was of enemy blood. She was not even legitimate by birth. An illegitimate daughter of the nobility had no business sitting on an imperial throne.